This is the business of pop culture, where we explore the intersection of entertainment, media, and consumer engagement. Hello, Julia. What are we talking about this week?
We are talking about the decline of the past 15 years of online news media and some potential new sprouts that hopefully are somewhat charting the future for news. In particular, I think an interesting thing that happened on the 15th of May this week is that The Messenger, which is a very well-funded new startup from the former The Hill owner, Jimmy Finkelstein, just launched, backed by $50 million. That was an interesting development. That's something that is a news outlet could apparently still garner huge investment from the VC class of the world.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's been a pretty dreadful couple of weeks for the media outlets that we once called new media, things like BuzzFeed and Vice.
Yeah, so BuzzFeed News has been shut down. Giorno Peretti, the CEO, has said that this part of their business has been running at loss numbers for years. Similarly, Vice Media has gone into bankruptcy, which had been treated as the heir to MTV News, which is also now being shut down as MTV parent company Paramount has cut 25% of its employees. So it's just been a fairly apocalyptic week.
So what do we think is the problem here? BuzzFeed was once a hugely successful company. Vice too, it had the ears of the youth. So what's gone wrong?
That's a good question. We had a bit of media attention brouhaha a couple of months ago when it transpired that Gen Z consumers mostly go to TikTok now to find out about the news. But really, if you think about it, it does make sense because especially news delivery comes down to trust, right? And younger consumers just tend to trust their peers. And they find their peers mostly on TikTok nowadays.
So if these news organizations are going to be competing with TikTok, what have you been seeing that's tapping into these new trends in media consumption?
There are a number of really interesting new developments in news. For instance, there's Artifact, which is an AI personalized, yet again, news aggregation platform founded by the Instagram co-founders Kevin Systrom and Mike Krieger. And it's just trying to leverage more or less that same mechanic that's driving younger consumers towards TikTok, trying to analyze what the user is looking to read, but then also trying to actively counteract the formation of information bubbles. So the algorithm also uses their information about the reader to diversify their input, and it lets people tap into the news pieces that are popular within their existing network. You can get notifications when one of your preferred journalists posts a new piece. The concept of trust in news media is somewhat pivoting away from organizations. Say you might trust the BBC or the New York Times as the news organizations of record, and towards individual journalists, building these smaller trust communities.
I just want to pause at this point to say that the business of pop culture is having a bit of a break for a couple of weeks. We will be back soon with even more pop cultural insights, so hit that subscribe button if you want to be alerted about when we return. So let's talk about another one of these newer upstart news media organizations, Semaphore, which is founded by Ben Smith, who's just released a book called Traffic, which is all about BuzzFeed and Gawker, the 2010s race for eyeballs. And what's Semaphore all about?
Essentially, they are experimenting with creating formats that reflect the way that modern consumers already consume information. One really interesting interview format that they have is a 10-minute interview that's being held via text messaging. So it's not just presented or editorialized into this format, but it is actually engaging with politicians or leaders of industry through the format of text, which kind of gives a different insight into the way they communicate.
It's an interesting one, Semaphore, and I think Ben's book, Traffic, which is definitely worth reading if you're interested in this whole story of where media is going. Jeff Jarvis, the media professor, wrote an interesting review of it on Medium, and he talked about the fact that we haven't really begun to see what the future of news is in the sort of age of the niche. The mainstream is dead as far as he's concerned. Now we are looking at a very fragmented media landscape. I think what's interesting about Semaphore and Substack and these other sort of platforms is that they are experimenting with format. What are your thoughts?
First of all, for our members, it's going to be really interesting to look out for our report on the social news media, which is publishing later in June this year. And what I think is really vital here is that we don't confuse the concept of niche or small audience engagement with the formation of bubbles, because I think much of the polarization conversation of the past 10 years has been down to this justified fear that people can kind of retreat into just their fairly limited social circles and then never be exposed to different ideas again, but rather I think the actual opposite is true with the idea of the niche news development that then enables you to actually interact with your audience as individuals or smaller groups. You can talk to them, but they can also talk back to you, and you create more of a conversation. It's the same pattern that we're seeing with really interesting new news organizations that are trying to revive the idea of local news and kind of have the boots on the ground journalism again, to scale things down to smaller, more or less independently operating groups rather than one mass audience that is really too lumpy and heavy to navigate or do any kind of dynamic digestion of news with. And I think that's where we're going to see the most interesting and hopefully edifying developments in the way that we consume news over the next 10 years.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Julia. As I say, we're going on a break for a few weeks, but hit that subscribe button and we will see you again soon.